Welcome back to the channel, friends. Tonight, we're diving into 3 unsettling tales that show just how thin the line can be between ordinary life and something much darker. From eerie encounters with strangers who know too much to secrets lurking just above our heads, each story will leave you questioning what's real and what's hiding in the shadows. If you're here for a chill you won't forget, hit the like button, subscribe for more, and let us know in the comments. What would you do if you found out something sinister was closer than you ever imagined? The shadow on the wall. Working at a call center isn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills. In Fort Collins, Colorado, our office was in a converted warehouse, tucked away on the outskirts of town. The building had its quirks, flickering lights, the occasional draft, but nothing out of the ordinary, at least until strange things started happening in the break room. It began with whispers. I'd grab a coffee late in the evening, and sometimes I'd hear faint voices like someone talking just beyond the walls. I assumed it was an echo from another office, or maybe someone on a call nearby. But then one night I was alone in the break room and the voices were louder, clearer. They were coming from the far wall, which bordered the old storage area that no one used anymore. Curious, I pressed my ear to the wall, listening. It was a conversation, soft but frantic, as if people were trapped on the other side, whispering in panic. I strained to make out words, but they faded, leaving only silence. The next day I mentioned it to my friend Kyle, who'd worked there longer. He laughed, brushing it off. "That's just the building," he said. "It's old and creaky. People have been saying it's haunted for years, but it just sounds carrying." I tried to laugh along, but something about the way Kyle said it felt off, like he knew more than he was letting on. Over the following weeks, the voices grew louder, and I began noticing shadows flickering on the break room wall. They weren't shadows from anyone in the room. Most of the time, I'd be alone. But they moved as though people were on the other side, pacing restlessly. One night, curiosity got the best of me, and I went into the storage area behind the break room to investigate. The place was dark, filled with old desks, boxes, and dust thick enough to blanket everything. The silence was almost oppressive, and as I moved further in, I noticed something strange on the wall. Handprints. They were faint, like the outline left by someone pressing their hands against the wall from the other side. They formed a pattern, as if people had been reaching out, trying to push through. My stomach churned, and I backed away, convinced it was just a trick of the light. But as I turned to leave, I heard a loud thud, like something striking the wall from inside the break room. I bolted back to my desk, heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night I had trouble sleeping. My dreams filled with images of shadows pressing against walls, faces I couldn't quite see. The next day I tried to put it out of my mind, but the office felt different, charged with a strange energy. My coworkers noticed it too. Kyle kept looking over his shoulder, and a few others mentioned feeling like they were being watched. Even our supervisor, Linda, a no-nonsense woman, seemed jumpy. Then one evening, Kyle came up to me, his face pale. "I think there's something in the break room," he whispered. "I saw someone." We decided to investigate together. Armed with flashlights, we entered the break room, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The shadows seemed to thicken as we approached the wall, and the air grew colder, heavy with an unsettling stillness. That's when we saw it. A shadow on the wall, shaped like a person, except there was no one there to cast it. The shadow moved, shifting slightly, as if aware of our presence. We stared, frozen, as the shadow raised its hand, pressing it against the wall. And then, slowly, it turned, as though looking straight at us. "Did you see that?" Kyle stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Before I could answer, the shadow moved, its form stretching and twisting, spreading across the wall until it covered the entire surface. Whispers filled the room, louder, more urgent, overlapping until they formed a cacophony of voices, pleading, screaming, demanding to be heard. We bolted out of the room, hearts pounding. As we reached the hallway, a low, guttural growl echoed from behind us. We turned, flashlights trembling, and saw the shadow spilling out of the break room, crawling along the walls like ink, reaching toward us. We ran, stumbling through the empty office, the shadows following, stretching, twisting like something alive. As we reached the exit, Kyle tripped, and I grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet just as the shadow reached for him, its form morphing into something almost human, with empty eyes that seemed to bore into us. We didn't stop until we were outside, gasping for breath, the building looming dark and silent behind us. That night, we both decided to quit, unable to shake the feeling that something was lurking in the walls, something that had been trapped and was now free. The next day, I returned to pick up my things, hoping it was all just a hallucination. The office was strangely quiet, and there was an odd chill in the air as I walked through the empty desks. When I reached the break room, I hesitated, remembering the shadow, but I had to go in one last time. I told myself it was just to make sure everything was in my locker. But deep down, I knew I was searching for proof, something to make sense of the horror I'd witnessed. The room was dim, only lit by the early morning light filtering through the windows. Everything looked normal. No shadows, no handprints. But as I moved to the wall where we'd seen the shadow, I noticed something. A single faint handprint smeared across the wall like someone had pressed their hand there before being dragged away. My heart pounded and I took a step back, feeling a chill creep up my spine. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard it. A faint whisper, just like before, but this time, it was clearer. "Don't leave me." My blood ran cold. I looked around, my eyes scanning the empty break room, but I was alone. Or at least I thought I was. The voice sounded close, too close, as if it were right beside me. I felt a cold breeze brush against my cheek, and the whisper grew louder, more insistent. "Help me. I'm still here." My mind raced as I stumbled out of the room, feeling as though unseen eyes were following me. The walls seemed to press in around me, the whispers growing louder until they filled my head, echoing with pleas and cries. I forced myself to run, barely able to breathe, as I made my way down the hallway and out of the building. Outside, I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. But even then, the feeling of being watched lingered. I turned, glancing back at the building. In the window of the break room, I thought I saw a figure, a dark silhouette standing still, watching me with hollow eyes. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the empty window and the shadowed room behind it. I never went back. Kyle and I kept in touch for a while, sharing updates about our new jobs, but we never spoke about what happened that night in the break room. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe stress playing tricks on my mind. But sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows grow long, I still hear the whispers. They come from the walls, faint and distant, begging, pleading, always saying the same thing. "Don't leave me." I don't know what it wanted, what was trapped in that building, and I hope I never find out. But I'll never forget the look of those hollow eyes, watching from the shadows, waiting for someone to answer their call. And sometimes in the dead of night, I wonder if it's still there, waiting in the walls, searching for someone to take my place. The Stranger in the Attic. It was a chilly October evening, and I had just gotten back from work. My wife, Megan, and our daughter, Sophie, were busy carving pumpkins in the kitchen, getting ready for Halloween. We lived in a quiet, suburban neighborhood in Toledo, Ohio, and life was fairly predictable. I liked it that way. But that night, something felt off. After dinner, Megan asked me to go up to the attic and bring down our box of Halloween decorations. She was big on decorating for the holidays, and I figured I'd get it over with while she and Sophie cleaned up the kitchen. The attic was a small, cramped space above the second floor, accessible by a rickety ladder that folded down from the ceiling. I hadn't been up there in a while, but I knew exactly where the decorations were, tucked in a corner near a stack of old boxes we hadn't touched since we moved in. As I climbed the ladder, the musty smell of old cardboard and insulation hit me. I flicked on the dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling and started rummaging through the boxes. Just as I found the Halloween bin, I heard something. A soft creaking sound like wood bending under pressure. I froze. The attic was full of old wood beams, so it wasn't unusual for the floor to creak. But this sound wasn't from where I was standing. It came from the far corner, near the vent that overlooked the backyard. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the house settling or a draft pushing something out of place. But the noise was unmistakable. It sounded like something, or someone, had shifted weight on the floorboards. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the box of decorations. My mind raced, but I told myself I was overreacting. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone up there. Slowly, I turned and glanced toward the dark corner of the attic. Nothing. Just a pile of boxes and some old furniture we had stored away. But the uneasy feeling lingered. I grabbed the box of decorations and made my way back to the ladder, carefully lowering the bin down first before climbing down myself. Megan was waiting for me at the bottom, and I tried to shake off the weirdness as I handed her the box. "You okay?" she asked, noticing the look on my face. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just thought I heard something up there." "Probably nothing." Megan laughed lightly. "This old house always makes weird noises." I nodded, but something still didn't feel right. That night, after Sophie was tucked into bed and the house was quiet, I found myself lying awake, thinking about the attic. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But then, around 1 a.m., I heard it again. A creak, followed by another. This time, it was louder, coming from directly above our bedroom. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I strained to listen, and there it was again. A faint shuffling sound, like something or someone was moving around in the attic. I nudged Megan awake. "Do you hear that?" She groggily turned over. "What?" "I don't hear anything." "There's someone in the attic," I whispered, my voice shaky. "I heard it earlier too." Megan sat up, her face paling. "You're scaring me." "I'm not kidding," I said, already climbing out of bed. "Stay here. I'm going to check it out." I grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand and headed for the attic ladder. The house was completely still, except for the faint noise above us. I climbed the ladder slowly, the beam from my flashlight shaking as I reached the top. The attic was eerily quiet. I stood at the entrance for a moment, listening, but the shuffling had stopped. I shone the flashlight around the room, sweeping over the boxes and old furniture. Everything looked the same as before. But then as I stepped deeper into the attic, my foot caught on something. I pointed the flashlight down, and my blood ran cold. There on the floor was a crumpled blanket, and next to it an empty jar of peanut butter. My heart raced as I realized what I was seeing. Someone had been living up here. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. That's when I heard it again, a soft creak from the far corner. I whipped the light around and caught a glimpse of movement. A figure hunched over behind the boxes. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "Come out!" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the figure stepped into the light. It was a man. His clothes were filthy, his face gaunt and pale. He looked like he hadn't bathed in weeks. His eyes were wide, almost wild as he stared at me. He didn't say a word. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced with fear and confusion. How long had he been up here? How did he get in? My hands shook as I took a step back, keeping the flashlight trained on him. "I don't want any trouble," the man finally muttered, his voice raspy. "I've been staying here for a few days. Just needed somewhere warm." "Get out," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "Get out of my house." The man raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "I'm leaving, I swear. I didn't touch anything. I just needed a place to sleep." I watched in horror as he slowly moved toward the ladder, his eyes never leaving mine. He climbed down without another word, and I heard the front door open and close quietly a moment later. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting in the living room with a kitchen knife clutched in my hand, just in case. Megan sat beside me, wide-eyed and terrified. We didn't speak much, too shaken by what had just happened. The police arrived shortly after, but by then the man was long gone. They searched the attic and confirmed what I already knew. He had been living there for at least a few days, maybe longer. The jar of peanut butter and the blanket were proof of that. We changed the locks the next morning and made sure every window was securely shut. But the sense of safety I'd always felt in our home was gone. Now every time I hear a creak or a shuffle in the attic, my mind goes back to that night. And I wonder, how long had he been watching us before I finally heard him? The Stranger's Bet. It was a quiet Wednesday evening at the Red Lantern, a dimly lit bar just outside downtown Houston. I wasn't supposed to be working the late shift, but I'd swapped with a co-worker to earn a few extra bucks. Most of the regulars were there, nursing their drinks, eyes glued to the TV above the bar, which played a basketball game on mute. It was the kind of night where everything felt predictable. I was half asleep on my feet, thinking I'd close up without a single incident. Around 10 p.m., a man I'd never seen before walked in. He looked to be in his early 50s, with graying hair slicked back and a neatly pressed suit that looked out of place among the bar's usual crowd. He had an air of confidence that set him apart, and as he settled onto a bar stool, his eyes scanned the room, lingering on each person with a strange intensity. It felt like he was sizing everyone up, almost like he was looking for something, or someone, specific. After a while, he waved me over. "Slow night, huh?" he asked, his voice calm and steady, carrying a peculiar sense of authority. I shrugged. Pretty typical for a weeknight. He smiled faintly, leaned closer, and said, "I'll make you a bet. If I can get someone in here to do exactly what I want, you'll give me a free drink. If I fail, I'll leave a $100 tip for your trouble." I laughed, thinking he was just another barfly looking to amuse himself. "All right, you're on," I replied, figuring I'd get a laugh and maybe a big tip out of it. Besides, who would turn down a friendly wager? He scanned the room again, his gaze landing on a man seated at a table by the window, a regular named Carl. Carl was a quiet guy, mostly kept to himself, and came in every week to have a couple of drinks. The stranger nodded as though he'd made a decision and called out, "Hey Carl, mind if I ask you something?" Carl looked up, visibly confused, but he got up and approached the bar. The stranger didn't say anything at first, just locked eyes with him. There was something strange in that gaze, an intensity that made me feel uneasy even from a distance. Carl stood there looking back at him with a distant expression, like he was caught in a daze. Finally, the stranger leaned in and whispered something I couldn't make out. His lips moved slowly, his tone almost soothing, like he was telling a secret only Carl was meant to hear. Carl's face went blank, his usual friendly expression replaced with a vacant, almost robotic stare. He turned without a word, walked to the exit and stepped outside, his movements mechanical, as if he were in some kind of trance. I glanced back at the stranger, half expecting him to laugh and call Carl back, but he just sat there, swirling his drink with a satisfied smile, as though this were the outcome he'd anticipated. "What did you say to him?" I asked, a twinge of anxiety creeping in. "Just suggested he take a walk," the stranger replied, his tone casual, almost indifferent. "You'd be amazed at how persuasive words can be." My nerves prickled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Carl was a grown man. Maybe he just needed some air. But as the minutes ticked by and he didn't come back, my unease grew. After another 10 minutes, I decided to go outside and check on him. I found Carl down the block, standing in the middle of the street, staring up at a streetlight like it held some hidden meaning. His expression was blank, his eyes unfocused, and he didn't respond when I called his name. "Carl?" I said, grabbing his shoulder. He blinked as if waking from a dream and looked around, bewildered. "What? How did I get out here?" "You don't remember?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He shook his head, visibly shaken, muttering something about needing to get home. I watched him go, unsettled by the whole experience. When I returned to the bar, the stranger was still there, sipping his bourbon, watching me with that same unnerving smile. "Guess I won the bet," he said, raising his glass with a self-satisfied smirk. A chill ran down my spine. "Who are you?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Just a man who likes to test his influence," he replied, placing a $100 bill on the counter. "Consider that your tip and a word of advice. Be careful who you listen to. Words are powerful things." With that, he finished his drink, stood up, and left without another word. The bar felt colder after he was gone, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just encountered someone dangerous, someone who knew far more about human behavior than he should. I never saw him again, but strange things started happening at the Red Lantern after that night. Regulars seemed distracted, almost distant, and conversations that used to flow easily now faded into uncomfortable silences. Some of the patrons would sit alone, lost in thought, as if something invisible had taken hold of their minds. I even overheard one customer muttering to himself in the corner, repeating words like he was trying to remember something just out of reach. For weeks, I tried to convince myself it was just the bar's atmosphere, that maybe I was letting my imagination run wild. But sometimes in the quiet moments when the bar was empty, I'd feel the stranger's presence, lingering like a shadow, reminding me of that night. His calm, confident stare, the way he'd manipulated Carl so easily, it haunted me. One night as I was closing up, I noticed something odd. Carved into the wood under the bar was a single word: "Listen." It was faint, barely visible, but unmistakably there. I hadn't seen it before, and I was sure it hadn't been there when I'd started my shift. Deep down, I knew that man had left something behind. A mark, a sense of control that lingered like a ghost in the room. And though I tried to forget, his words echoed in my mind. A quiet reminder that sometimes all it takes to control someone is the right voice at the right time. Thanks for joining us tonight as we explored these eerie stories. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones hiding in plain sight. If these tales gave you a chill, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more haunting stories, and let us know in the comments which one had you looking over your shoulder. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, some doors are best left closed.